But at a very young age, I had this understanding that our entire lens of reality is filtered through our emotional state. Because I would have circumstances and people and situations feel radically different. When you are a deeply feeling person, your vulnerability sits right next to your shame. And you can put yourself out there or try something new and have it not go well and plummet internally.
When it comes to my daughter, I say that fail 100 times, it just doesn't matter. You have to figure out what you want to write, what you want to paint.
When we say our aligned no's, it can help the other person find their aligned yes. It can make the other person perhaps find a friendship that's a better fit. It can help the other person maybe self-reflect in a way that they haven't up till now.
Hi, Jen. Welcome to Stories and Stanza. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm so glad we figured out the timing with this. I know it's a little tricky. So happy to be here.
I'm so glad that we worked out the timing, and I have a lot to talk to you about. For our listeners on Stories and Stanza, could you briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah. I'm going to do a little bit of like personal history and professional history because they're both relevant here. So I'm going to take you back to my teenage years real quick because I know this is going to come up today. But I struggled profoundly with seasonal depression. I grew up in upstate New York, which is cold and dreary, and I did not know what it was from about ages 12 to 17. And then I figured out what it was, and there were some simple solutions, and I started to feel a whole lot better. But at a very young age, I had this understanding that our entire lens of reality is filtered through our emotional state. Because I would have circumstances and people and situations feel radically different times of the year. And then as an adult, college was a really good period of time for me. I chose to become a dentist because it suited. I love both art and science, and on paper it made sense. Well, fast forward, went to school for all these years, and I get a few years into my career, and I just don't like it. And I really just struggled for so many years to even just come up for air between all the education and learning all the new things and the imposter syndrome. And I started to struggle with some health stuff. And when I was 28, I'm now 38, so about a decade ago, I remember looking around and thinking, like, I've done all the things. I have the job, I'm married, we just bought our home, like, check, 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 but I'm miserable. I feel insecure a lot of the time. Like, anxious. So I started to do this kind of deep dive to see what I could tweak and harness related to that experience I had as a teenager. How much can I shift from the inside out? And that's been a journey I've been on for the last decade. It's been phenomenal. It took a while to see results, but then there's been these huge shifts at a couple times along the way. And then professionally, I, my husband and I have been very determined to pay down and pay off debt. So as we've paid off debt, I've been able to cut back my hours as a dentist. I cut way back about 2 years ago, really took time to like rest and recover from life and really break my habit of attaching my worth to like doing, being, achieving, all those things. And this business arose from a completely different energy about 9 months ago.
That is amazing. And we look forward to hearing more from you during this discussion. So, the first thing I wanted to tell you, and of course, to the listeners who are joining us for the first time, that in Stories and Stanza, this is a section we call it Fail With Me. And I chose the title when I was going through a very difficult time, and I felt that I'm not doing enough at anything really, like as a husband, as a father, as a son, maybe. And I was like angry and upset, frustrated all the time. And I thought that someday I will talk about it. And gradually, when I thought that I'll talk about it, I chose the title Fail With Me, and hence the podcast was born. And I started unpacking failure. And I have spoken to so many amazing people around the world who have come to the show and shared their take on failure and what it is. Then once you understand what it is, then you come out of it, then you heal from it. But what it is, how we unpack it, that was the theme behind Fail With Me, and which is how we connected on social media. So the first thing I would like to hear from you, Jane, is that how does that idea sit with you, failure and understanding, unpacking failure?
If you had asked me this question 10 years ago, I probably would have been too uncomfortable to even answer the question. And now it's a beautiful question because it's just part of the yin and the yang of life, I would say. So, failure, and this answer may not surprise you because I know you follow my content, but there's the external, the objective thing. There's like, okay, I'm just gonna give a really simple example. Like, I put all this time into like this reel and then like no one liked it and it flopped. That's an external version of failure. An internal version is how that makes us feel, right? So, the external part, at least certainly in entrepreneurship, but also very much in life, we have to be able to put ourselves out there and try things, or else, like, I have children. None of us knew what that was going to be like before we did it. Everything professionally, I've taken so many leaps of faith, but that's all the external part. The internal part, are you familiar with Dr. Becky Kennedy? She's like a
Not
parenting guru in the States, and her approach I love so much because instead of treating our children like something to like sort of like control, it's very humanizing and it prioritizes connection, but from a place where you're still the sturdy pilot, she likes to say. Like you're still setting the healthy boundary, but you're doing it by saying, like, gosh, I know I wouldn't want to put away my iPad right now either, but this is why we need to do like you're setting the boundary, but from the most humanizing of ways. You listen. Anyway, she has this concept called deeply feeling kids. And it's about a fifth of us. There's a whole book that's been written by another person that calls it highly sensitive people. And I don't love that title because I feel like it makes it sound more like a weakness. But I am a deeply feeling adult. And I wouldn't be surprised if you or people in your world maybe fall into this category too, because I feel like that's why we all connect. But when you are a deeply feeling person, your vulnerability sits right next to your shame. And you can put yourself out there or try something new and have it not go well and plummet internally. And it took me a long time to A, realize that. Because until you realize that you can't like step back from it. But once I realized I was doing that, like I had a fear that I was too much. So other entrepreneurial pursuits I had in the past, there was just this unbelievable mental exhaustion and almost depression that would end up happening for me over and over. And it was because I would like put myself out there, then be terrified and have like a shame spiral that I was too much. So ultimately it wouldn't work. I would fail. But like I would shame spiral about many failures along the way too. So now that I've evened that out and recognized it, I just don't have that happen anymore. Or if I do, it's so small that I can stop it before it starts. Now let's talk about something else internally. So this we have thoughts that just chatter all the time, right? So that's like the volume of the thoughts. It's like the shame spiral thoughts, if you will, that I've turned way down. What I've turned up is my worth and it coming from a place that's just inherent. And I think our biggest struggle as humans is universal. Once basic needs are met and we are safe and we are fed and we are housed, I think our biggest struggle is the fear or the belief that we are not enough. And I've done a lot of work around this, but the simplest tool is just to like write it everywhere. It's the wallpaper of my phone right now. It's on my fridge. We talk about it with our kids. But the failure, so now when I have external failures, which I have all the time, the internal part just doesn't really, it's like, oh, okay. And then you just move on. So,
that is beautifully said. And personally, I have kind of been part of very transformative journey, and that has happened mainly through this podcast, the people I met and the ideas I heard, and I think it kind of shaped me who I am today. The next thing I wanted to hear from you is you mentioned that you follow a framework uh,
yes, I
about
do.
burnout and
Uh,
recovering from there. And while burnout may look very different from different people, and I have my own take on this. I want to hear from you that how do you see burnout and what is the framework that you mentioned?
awesome. So it'd be in a perfect world if we were burnt out, we'd just like stop everything and do whatever we wanted to for weeks on end until we recovered, right? But in real life, we have to keep living and working and doing all of the things as we recover. So I call my framework ground, heal, thrive. And this is rooted in nervous system science, which I've taken a really deep dive into. But When we are dysregulated, when our nervous system isn't functioning properly, we go into fight flight, which is like that frantic energy, or we numb, we like almost like collapse internally and go into freeze too easily or stay there too long. So I'm just giving a little bit of background before I go into the framework, but there is a state called functional freeze. And once I learned about this, I was like, "Ah, this is what's wrong with me. This like gut feeling that I've had for so long that there's like just something broken about me. This is it. And I'm not broken. Now that I can see what it is, I can fix it." So, what functional freeze is when our nervous system literally doesn't come out of fight, flight, or freeze for prolonged periods of time. You just oscillate back and forth between do, go, and then just like numbing. And I think I was in that for almost a decade. And when we're on the go all the time, we, so I'm going to weave in another concept real quick and then I'll talk about my own framework, but it's a concept called story follows state. When we are in fight flight, our physiology is in fight flight, our thoughts, the chatter that pops up on its own is saying, oh, there's danger. I can never get it all done. The world's a scary place. When our body goes into freeze shutdown, we get very self critical. We feel very defeated. We wonder what's the point of even trying. When we can learn to regulate our physiology and bring ourselves into rest digest more easily, more sustainably, be more sturdy in that place so it doesn't take as much to like rock our boat, our thoughts are, I'm enough and I'm capable and I can figure this out. So, my framework, the ground, in order to do any kind of healing work, shifting belief work, any kind of nervous system regulation work, the first step isn't, quote, like calming down or like just jumping into breath work. The first step is like many things that you can do to feel safe. We have to feel safe for these other things to follow or to shed old beliefs or let stress leave our body. So there's a few different things that I teach to feel safe, but the simplest thing is to literally just like feel your body in space, like feel your body on the surface beneath you. It brings you out of your head, like slowly scan the room for details. I call this orienting. Well, I didn't make that up. My mentor in this field calls it orienting. And as boring as a practice as this sounds, so I have an alert that goes off on my phone twice a day. It doesn't make sound, it just pops up that says pause, breathe. So it's not a thing that's being added to my to-do list, but I am weaving a grounding practice to have my body feel safe. This is one of those like slow, steady types of things. But it's a muscle that we can build so that when we get thrown off, we can return to that state faster. So, tools to build the safety, that's the ground. The heal is realizing where you have these perhaps faulty or limiting self-sabotaging beliefs and shedding them, or in my case, being able to self-reflect on perhaps like personality traits or things that you've adapted to like because that's how you interacted in your family of origin or that's how you interacted growing up. Like there's all these parts of myself like I would present as far more extroverted than I truly am for most of my life, and I had to tune into why that was so exhausting for me. That was a form of burnout. Being able to shed the false sense of safety that I got from that could only happen once I could be more still, if that makes sense. So that's the ground and the heal. The thrive is essentially being able to live life on your own terms. But it's really hard to go make changes in your business, your career, your family, any of these things if you're just always, your physiology is always spiraling and you don't have these other two things first. So the thrive, I have worked with people who have sought me out just for inner work type of stuff. I am primarily a business mentor, but the thrive section often includes boundaries and saying no and learning to have no visceral guilt or like having a prepared response of how to eloquently say it in a way that the other person might say, gosh, I have too much going on too. Thank you for helping me see that. Like it's just this positive thing to say no. And then from a business coaching standpoint, the Thrive includes all of like practical, tactical of getting an online business set up and running.
That is amazing. And we touched upon this, but I'll just go a little bit back and in terms of understanding failure, that
Yeah.
all these mental blocks that come from failure
Mhm.
is some form of conditioning.
Yes. Yes. 100%. Yeah.
And I want to hear your thoughts on how to recognize that and break those patterns according to you.
Yeah. Ooh, I love this. Okay. So when we grow up and go through school and all the typical things that we need to do to quote unquote achieve success, it's all very linear, right? And there's these like set points that like hoops to jump through. And while there's value in learning some of those skills, it can also disconnect us from ourselves, I think. And it is so easy to start to put our worth into those external benchmarks that we're hitting instead of having our worth be this. Now, I am saying this as a 38-year-old who's done a lot of work. I would not have been able to see this even 10 years ago, much less when I was growing up and in school. But I think when we start to derive when we see life as this like dance, this like flow, which honestly, like to tie it back into the nervous system stuff, because my body is regulated, because I'm often in a very healthy rest digest state, and like I had a medical emergency in our dental office last week, did it, dealt with it, she was fine, all the things, but then my body was able to return to that place of harmony. Like failure doesn't exist almost in this headspace because it's just part of like the dance, the flow, the how you learn. And also, I think it's less likely to happen because when our body is in a good regulated place, we can see choices better and make choices more easily, if that makes sense. But it's a lot easier to regulate from, what if you make a mistake and it throws off the day or whatever, like, and the mistake could be as simple as like, this is something I used to do all the time before my nervous system was more regulated, but I would like drop a mug by mistake and break it, right? Like we all have moments like that, or stub your toe. That's a mistake. That's a failure. That's a blunder in your day. And I would shame spiral about stuff like that in the past. And now it doesn't happen as often. And when it does, it's just no big deal.
Absolutely. And I asked that because there are two things I see related to it. One, of course, you're talking about the shame spiral is like the lack of self-awareness, so to speak,
Yeah.
that it gets
Yeah.
tangled to that conditioning that you are trying to win for the approval
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah.
And I think it relates back very well to the concept you just mentioned in the beginning about dealing with children. That,
Yeah.
yes, that's something has been a very major takeaway from me. That when if I say that, oh, you have to do this to win my approval, as opposed to if I
Right.
say that you figure this for yourself, I'm here just as a supporting parent and I'll help you with what
Yeah.
you need, but you have to figure this out yourself. I think that kind of changes a lot of things for children growing up.
Yeah.
We do not translate, or we do not let our, lack of better word, trauma or any repressed feelings pass
Mhm.
on to the following generation.
Yeah.
So
I love
I
that.
can
It's easier
totally,
said than done, but something we certainly talk about a lot in our house, and we're not perfect at it. But
yes. Yeah, it just reminds me that when I was growing up, when I wanted to be artistic, I wanted to write something, or I wanted to paint something, I was told that this is not the way to do it. You have to do it in a certain way to be able to good at it.
Mhm.
And I do not agree with that narrative personally. So
Mhm.
when it comes to my daughter, I say that fail 100 times, it just doesn't matter. You have to figure out what you want to write, what you want to paint. And I started doing this at a very early age. And believe me, I haven't taught her anything to do with writing, but she writes pretty good on her own. She paints pretty good on her own. And I see that her confidence flourish. And I say, it's you have to do it. I don't have to do it. It's all your credit. Yeah, taking that,
I love that. How old is she now?
my daughter is close to 13 now, 12 and a half. So she
Okay,
just
okay.
just started
Than
high
I
school
realized.
here. And yeah, so it was a very challenging period with COVID because all of a sudden their school stopped, and she wanted to take art classes and she couldn't go to it because of those lockdowns and things. And then I thought that I can. do this to encourage her and just say that you do this on your own and you maybe you fail, that's okay. And then you will paint a new picture and then you will figure out what is your style and you will uh,
Mhm.
keep doing it. So it reminded me what you said about children and understanding them. It kind of reminded me uh, this particular feeling. And coming back to our discussion, we touched upon healing, and
Yeah.
in this complicated world, healing can mean very different to very different people. And
Yeah.
we are talking about burnout. And yes, I often see I work in financial services, and
Okay.
I've worked very closely with people who feel this burnout, and what I'll say that they are maybe adapting to alcohol,
Yeah.
smoke, or whatever, just some avenues to lighten that stress. But there's something I tell my friends is that, what is bothering you, it's not outside, it's inside.
Yeah.
If you learn to look at it, and then only you can start healing. With all these external factors that you are leaning on, they are not actually healing you. They are maybe giving you a momentary relief, but they're not really healing you. And I want to hear your thoughts on healing and what you tell
Yeah.
people who.
So, and I'm going to start with the burnout lens because, like I was saying earlier, like it would be so nice if we could just have all like press pause on life and have all this time to work on these things. But the reality is, when we're burnt out, we still have to try to figure out the healing piece along with just maintaining all these things that we have going on every day. So, first of all, I will say for anyone who's listening to this who's very burnt out, I've been there and it can feel really dark and it can feel like you just can't see a way out. So, one of the things that helped me the most, I read this book a few years ago that's really simple. I have it summarized on my blog, but it's called The Power of No. It's by Claudia and James Altucher. I had read books about boundaries and tuning into what feels right for you and that kind of thing, but this was such a simple book. And I didn't realize until I read that how many things that I still said yes to that weren't aligned because I felt like I should, or someone would have this expectation of me, or there would be this consequence. But so much of it was my own guilt. And when I started to be able to free up, there's this thing called the 80-20 principle, right? Where like 20% of the people we spend our time with generate 80% of our joy. 20% of the people we spend our time with generate 80% of the stress. So when we can, and that's true across any phenomenon, 20% of the way we spend our time at work is probably what is most A, productive or B, enjoyable, and the flip side too. So when we can have these little shifts by learning to say no to what isn't suiting us, it frees up space for that aligned yes. And when we can make little shifts away from what's causing 80% of our stress and toward what's causing 80% of our joy, it like disproportionately shifts our mood. I think more than you'd think, both at work or like I was in this habit for years where I had a lot of friendships that just weren't that fulfilling, but it was just this like habit to spend time together. And that was something I didn't really know what to do with because as I evolved, I craved friendships where I could have much more depth. But as I learned to say no, there was never any, I can't remember a single awkward moment. I just started to politely decline plans and went through a bit of a cocoon phase. And I've come out the other side of that with organic friendships like coming into my life that are so much more aligned. So there's all these things in our life that can contribute to burnout. It's not just the amount of stuff you have on your plate, the amount of time you have. It's how much of that time and energy is going to things that are in alignment and how much is it that's obligation. But saying no and like really tuning into that initial like push or pull is a really great starting place.
And to you, how does the healing look like? And of course, you
Yeah,
cannot generalize this. As you
of
mentioned
course.
rightly, that the
Yeah.
stress is also very different for different people, right?
Yeah.
So where
So
does
for
it start?
start. Yeah. Let me see where I want to go with that. For me, healing has always come from being able to create space first. I have found it very hard to go through any kind of healing process if I'm constantly on the go or exhausted. So I think that saying no creates that little bit of space that isn't like at this point in my life, I'm in a very incredible position that we've worked really hard to be in, but I have non-negotiable time in my week that I don't schedule and I might read, I might but when we can carve out, even if it's like a few minutes at the end of the day or the beginning of the day, but time where we're just like choosing what we want to do in that moment, it can be so restorative. So, yeah, for me, the saying no creates space, and the creating space lets us, it kind of starts the ball of momentum rolling. For me, so much healing has come from nervous system regulation over time, which has been a lot of little tiny practices. Another healing thing that's helped me a ton that I'm going to share here, because it has been my biggest reward, lowest effort thing, is to sleep on an earthing mat. Are you familiar with earthing?
Yes.
Yeah. So, just a really powerful way to have our body's physiology be balanced out, like regular sunshine. For me, it's a lot of these little things, but you get to this point where they snowball enough that you start to have more energy. You can get a little bit more sleep. You can get deeper sleep. Ooh, quick little tangent there, because it's going to be very hard to heal if you're not getting good rest. And there's a lot of underdiagnosed airway and sleep issues, which is part of what I look at in dentistry, but that's my sister's specialty. So I'll send her handle at the end, but she creates a lot of really great content around where even if you're in your bed asleep for a certain number of hours, but you still have certain symptoms, there's probably an airway issue at play that's undiagnosed. But yeah, those are some of the starting places for me. But it's like a momentum thing, and feeling safe in your body and creating some space with your time are two of the big starting points for me.
We talked about boundary management, proper boundary management, and
Mhm.
I enormously respect the good things it can do to your life. And I see this in my corporate culture that not a lot of people are good at boundary management. And most of the issues boil down to like improper boundary management. Like we let
Yes.
people in and then we see that this is not working for me, right? And then it's very, very important. Now, on the other hand, if this is also something I noticed that if you are very good with your boundary management, you're very well guarded, then
Mhm.
sometimes you feel that the said person is not authentic. The said person is kind of too closed down. And
Mhm.
so, do we, so if we see this as a spectrum, one end is the vulnerability where we accept people and accept who we are. And on the other hand is very strict boundary management where we don't open up at all. So it's if I look that as a scale, where do
Yeah.
you reckon we should lean and when to do what? It's tricky thing.
Yeah,
There is maybe
no.
not one straight answer to this, but I see people at both end.
I
Some
love
people.
this question. I love this question. I've never had anyone ask me this like this before. So, in general, I think I'm going to share a belief that I have that I don't know if there's any way to prove it. I just believe this. But I believe when somebody asks us to do something that we don't want to do, and it could be like, I use the example of social plans a lot because I think it's just like a relatable one. When when we don't want to do it and they've asked us to do it, I think there's this belief that if we say no to them, it's creating like win lose situation where like we won because we got what we want, but they lose because they didn't get what they want. I don't think that's true. I think when we say our aligned no's, it can help the other person find their aligned yes. It can make the other person perhaps find a friendship that's a better fit. It can help the other person maybe self-reflect in a way that they haven't up till now. When we So what I often say is we think it's a win-lose, but it often ends up being a lose-lose. And I've actually created some content around this in terms of how wild the politics are in my country right now. And I'm not going to get into that right now, but there's things I think that the current administration thinks in terms of lack and scarcity. So there's all these policies that they want to make that they think are these like win policies, but they're actually like lose. Like when you play these things out, nobody wins. Whereas I think there are people who are rising in politics who will hopefully be in leadership positions, bigger ones in the future that come from a place of abundance and can see the aligned no's. They can see the things not to focus on because they just aren't helpful for humans, and they can see the aligned yeses that create win-win situations. So, paradigm shift on that. In terms of the scale that you mentioned, I would say that if somebody is on the saying yes to everything side, they're in a low self-esteem, people-pleasing mode. If somebody's on the no side of everything, they're in a fight, flight, like stressed out mode. And sometimes it's necessary to be there to get back into balance. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think the saying yes to everything side requires a little bit more self-reflection, but I think we do all have a happy place somewhere in there, depending on how much is being asked of us. And when we're really off kilter, it's our biggest job to kind of like ground ourselves first and then be able to say yes to more things. Of course, I'm talking like in life, that's not always possible, but it's an awareness. I used to take on much more than I do now, and I really just don't take on that much at this point in my life. I'm very comfortable. So I no longer have an ounce of guilt or anything uncomfortable in me when I give a no. And what I found is the amount of discomfort the other person feels is proportionate to the amount of discomfort I feel. And because I can offer a no now in like the most like loving, like appreciative of ways, the other person feels like immediate gratitude and appreciation. Like I can't tell you how many times on the social plan subject I've said no and the other person has said, I, gosh, you know what? I actually want to be in this Saturday night too. Thank you for helping me see that. So, yeah, I think there is a spectrum. I think there's different things to be aware of depending on where you fall on that. And I think we do tend to have a healthy medium, but we have to look for it.
Thank you. Yes, no, I absolutely agree that we do not have to be at the extreme end of the spectrums, but we can do better boundary management and yet choose to be authentic. That
Yes.
it's
Yes.
yes,
Yes.
it's not sort of one over the other, but I'm just
Correct.
saying that I brought that up because I've seen people at both ends that they
Yes.
are either here or they're there. And yeah, it's just very interesting. And we talked about insecurity at a
Yeah.
deeper level and things like
Yeah.
that. And to me, I think it's very fundamental, and insecurity looks very different to different people. And I try to relate that with mindfulness is when
Mm.
you are meditating or when you are being mindful about your inner work, and then probably you can address your true insecurities and win over them. And because most of the insecurities are probably not real, like it's your
Yeah.
perception,
Right.
right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So I
Exactly.
want to hear your thoughts around, like you mentioned insecurities, and we can very well
Yeah.
link that with our failure
For the
concepts.
failure thing. So I'm going to go back to the part where I talk about like the volume of the thoughts we don't want to have and the thoughts we do want to have. Turning up the belief that I am enough and that my worth is not dependent upon external things has been powerful for so many reasons. Because when we tie our worth to how much we're doing and achieving, which I think most of us land there, whether or not we want to, because we grow up in cultures where we go to school, we go to college, like it's a very doing oriented culture. But when we're in that, when we try to slow down, we feel awful. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but I would have times in dental school where I would get everything done and I would try to have like a slower Sunday and I would just feel beyond messy internally. And so I'd like find something to do because being productive felt better than whatever that was. It was really icky. And I've talked to enough people at this point to know that I'm not alone in that. But as I was able to turn up the volume of the thoughts that were like my own worthiness, which was like literally just writing, I am enough, mirrors, background of my phone, saying it out loud to myself in the mirror, these different things. Pretty quickly, like probably within a week, this like it's almost like there's a sturdy ground within myself that I started to be able to like sense and feel that I hadn't been able to feel for a long time. And over time, like momentum in any of these processes is so powerful. I can't emphasize enough how like you don't have to make all these big changes, but if you can start to shift the momentum, it's like it cracks that light in the burnout or the depression or any whatever it is that you're feeling. And depression can be physiological and a whole bunch of other things. But burnout, like if you can just crack some light and start to feel more sturdy inside, it can make a big difference. But the insecurity piece, with my worth being so tied to doing and external things, if one of those things didn't go right, which is sometimes completely out of your control, you just feel awful about yourself. So just being aware of that, recognizing that over time, being able to turn down the volume of those thoughts through nervous system regulation, turn up the volume of the worthiness thoughts through the I am enough affirmations.
That is beautifully said.
Thank you.
And uh, I think we have covered a lot of areas in our
Yeah.
discussion today. And we talked about burnout, we talked about your framework, talked about mindfulness, insecurities, a lot of things. Do you think there's anything that we haven't touched upon that you'd like to share with the audience?
So I'm going to share one little thing that has helped me a lot as a parent, and it's so little. So our physiology, and this might not be relatable to people who are listening to this that don't have young children or have never had young children, but for me as a woman who was pregnant and all those things, like our body and our physiology goes through so many things. And one of the things I've really struggled with that is now better is just feeling overstimulated, right? And that's part of what can contribute to burnout when you just feel like your brain is like firing in so many directions all the time. So I'm going to actually talk about two things that have helped me with this, but one is qigong, which is like very slow movements. It kind of like brings the energy out of your head and into your body. There's a guy on YouTube, Lee Holden is his name, and he has a few like 10-minute videos for qigong that I really like. If you can do it like outside barefoot or on a grounding mat, even better. The other thing that's helped me so much is these. Okay, so when one of our senses gets overwhelmed, any of the other senses are likely to get more overwhelmed, or like you're likely to hit that threshold sooner with any of your other senses. So with young children, sound has been really hard for me because my kids are young, they're loud, they're boys, they're energetic, their voices are still very high pitched. And I had, for the first 2 years of my younger son's life, I would hit a threshold by like 11 a.m. on a weekend and just be like toast, like just done. And I could never figure it out because I would wake up feeling we have good sleepers. We've been lucky with that. Like, and at some point I realized my hearing had become almost too acute postpartum. And this is, I now know, fairly common, or at least struggling with overstimulation as a parent, to put it in a more general box, is pretty common. So I wear these things in my ears. I don't have them in right now, but I get them on Amazon. They're $25. They're called Flare Calmers, FLARECALMERS. But like the effect, so they dim high pitch frequencies without reducing sound. And the effect of these, it's like taking an antidepressant or something. I don't know, but it helps my body just be less rattled by things in my environment. So I don't know. That's something that will resonate with some people that are listening to this and not with others. But I love things that are super simple and inexpensive and potentially solve a big problem.
That is amazing. I really love talking to you.
Quickly.
Yeah,
Yes.
we can conclude the discussion here. Thank you once again for taking the time to talk to Stories and
Appreciate it
Stanza
so
today.
much. Yep.